Today, I bring you a charming new mystery featuring none other than the brilliant Hercule Poirot, the world's most famous Belgian detective, created by Agatha Christie. This case is filled with twists, clever clues, and Poirot's signature little grey cells at work. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now let's get started. It was one of those rare afternoons in London where the air held neither chill nor damp, a perfect moment for tea, a touch of introspection, and the company of Hercule Poirot. We had taken refuge in his finely appointed flat on Whitehaven Mansions, and I, for one, was quite content. Poirot, of course, was not one to lounge idly. Even in moments of rest, the little grey cells required stimulation. That day, their source came in the form of a peculiar little object resting proudly on the table between us. "A music box, Hastings," Poirot announced, with the flourish of a magician producing a rabbit from a hat. And not just any, mind you. "Observe!" I leaned forward as he gently opened the lid. A delicate melody, faintly melancholic, began to play. A tune I did not recognize but found oddly familiar. The box itself was exquisite, inlaid with mother-of-pearl and lined with faded red velvet. "Picked it up at an auction yesterday," I remarked, sipping my tea. "It's lovely craftsmanship, though I must say the tune is a touch eerie." Poirot smiled indulgently. "Mais oui, eerie to you perhaps, but to me it sings of mystery. Look closely, Hastings. See how finely the gears are constructed, each tooth perfectly aligned. Precision, mon ami, it is the soul of a harmony." I chuckled. "You're quite poetic about your trinkets today." He adjusted his moustache. "Non, non, not poetic. Sentimental, perhaps. This, Hastings, is a voice from the past. Such objects, they carry secrets, do they not?" His words lingered in the air longer than the music did. And just as the final note faded into silence, a sharp knock came at the door. "Expecting anyone?" I asked. Poirot shook his head. "Non. But let us see what ghost the music box has awakened, eh?" Little did I know, the tranquility of our afternoon was about to vanish, and the delicate tune from that strange box would soon echo at the heart of a murder. The door opened to reveal a young woman, pale as ivory, with a gloved hand trembling around the handle of her handbag. Her posture was elegant, her clothes carefully chosen, but her eyes, those wide, anxious eyes, were unmistakably burdened with fear. I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly, stepping into the flat as Poirot ushered her inside with characteristic courtesy. "Not at all, mademoiselle," he said, motioning to the armchair by the fire. "Come, sit. You are troubled, that much is clear. Let us see if Hercule Poirot can be of assistance." She offered a faint smile as she sat. I took note of her hands. They gripped her bag with the force of someone resisting collapse. "My name is Eleanor Vane," she began, "and I believe you've recently purchased an item that once belonged to my family." I blinked. "Do you mean the music box?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was my aunt's, Madame Cécile Vane. She was a retired opera singer. She died 6 months ago." I glanced at Poirot, whose brows had already drawn together. He folded his hands, elbows resting neatly on his knees. "And you believe this music box should not have left your family?" "No, it's not that," Eleanor said quickly. "It's what was in the box." Her voice broke then, and she fumbled in her bag, producing a folded handkerchief. "When I saw it again, at the auction preview, I felt I had to retrieve it, but I arrived too late. You had already placed the winning bid." Poirot nodded gently. "I assure you, Mademoiselle Vane, I am not in the habit of hoarding family heirlooms. If you wish to reclaim it..." She held up a hand. Number. It's not the box I'm after. It's the bloodstain inside it. I felt a chill move through the room. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Blood, you say? Yes. Dried but unmistakable, hidden beneath the velvet lining. My aunt kept that box beside her bed until the day she died. Everyone said it was heart failure, but she had no history of illness. I think she was trying to tell someone something. I think... Her voice trembled. I think she was murdered. Poirot's expression was unreadable, but his voice turned hushed. Then, mademoiselle, you have brought to me the most curious of gifts. A melody wrapped in mystery and a whisper from the dead. And with that, the case of the music box had begun. I must admit, I had heard my fair share of odd beginnings to a case, but this one, this peculiar tale of a blood-stained music box, struck a particular chord, and not just with me. Miss Eleanor Vane sat stiffly upright, her gloved fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve, her eyes flickering nervously between Poirot and the object on the table. The music box, now closed, seemed to sit more ominously than before, as though guarding the secret it had cradled for months in silence. I know how it must sound, she said hesitantly. People don't think of blood and murder when they hear music boxes, but I saw it with my own eyes. A smear, deep in the lining, not large, but dark, unmistakable. You are quite certain it was blood, mademoiselle? Poirot asked, his voice low, deliberate. Yes, she replied. When I was a child, my aunt used to let me wind it before bed. I know every inch of that box. That stain was never there before. Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. And what did the others in your family say when you spoke of this, how shall we call it, this spectral stain? She hesitated. Nothing, because I haven't told them. Ah! Poirot's eyes lit up. Interesting. Most interesting. One finds a clue to a possible murder and shares it with no one. Why is that, I wonder? I suppose, she said slowly, because no one would believe me. They all accepted her death so easily. She was 70 after all. The doctor said it was heart failure. No autopsy was requested. And yet, I said, you don't believe it was natural? Eleanor shook her head. Aunt Cecile was strong, spirited, but more than that, she was frightened before she died. I visited her a few days before, and she kept saying strange things, hinting that someone in the house wanted her gone. Did she name anyone? Number only that she'd hidden something, that she had left a message. Poirot looked again at the music box. Then perhaps, mademoiselle, the message was not just in the music, but in what lies beneath it. There was a peculiar stillness in the room. Poirot, usually one to spring into elegant movement when intrigued, remained perfectly still, except for the tapping of one polished shoe against the carpet. Mon cher Hastings, he murmured at last, do you know why I purchased that box? I blinked, because it was beautifully made. Mais non, because it called to me, something about it, how it sat alone at the auction, how the tune lingered on a minor key. It felt unfinished. I arched an eyebrow. Unfinished? Oui, incomplete, as though a tale was being told, but the final notes were missing. Eleanor glanced between us, uncertain. Poirot turned to her. You believe your aunt was silenced, mademoiselle, and you believe that music box was her final voice. She nodded. I do. He stood, straightening the crease of his trousers. Then we shall listen to it again. Closely. Not for the music, but for the silences. But surely the police, I began. Poirot waved a dismissive hand. Non, non. The police are instruments of action. I, Hercule Poirot, am an instrument of thought. He walked to the box, opened it gently, and let the tune play once more. The melody, once merely curious, now felt laced with melancholy. And besides, he added, his eyes alight with sudden clarity, a woman of the stage does not leave this world without an encore. No, Hastings, this was not the final act. It was only the curtain rising. And so it began, with a tune, a blood stain, and the faintest suggestion of murder. As always, I had a feeling we were about to step into something far more tangled than appearances allowed. There was something inherently theatrical about the English countryside in late October. The trees stood like faded actors at the end of a long performance, shedding their golden costumes with quiet resignation. As our motorcar turned off the main road and up the winding drive toward Vane House, I couldn't help but feel the appropriate hush of a theatre before the curtain rose. It was a large ivy-covered estate, half swallowed by autumn's decay. Parts of the house appeared shut off entirely, windows shuttered, chimneys dormant. A place that once knew grandeur, but now lived under the burden of memory. Poirot sat beside me, hands clasped atop his walking stick, eyes roving over the estate with unblinking interest. "You feel it too, mon ami?" he murmured. "Feel what?" I asked, adjusting my collar. The air had grown noticeably colder. "The hush," he said. "The silence that is not peace, but secrecy. It clings to this place." I gave a small laugh. "You're growing poetic again." "Not poetic, Hastings. Observant." We were greeted at the great oak door by a stiff-faced butler named Lawson, who informed us that Mr. Julian Vane was expecting us in the drawing room. As we followed him down the long corridor, lined with portraits, dust-sleeved furniture, and a conspicuous absence of warmth, I noticed Poirot's eyes narrowing. "The house, it is grieving," he said softly, so that only I could hear. "But for whom, I wonder? The madame who is dead, or the secrets that still live?" When we entered the drawing room, the atmosphere shifted again. Furnishings of taste and elegance, a fire kept dutifully alive in the hearth, and decanters arranged with practiced precision on a walnut sideboard. A man stood beside the mantelpiece, elegant in dress, confident in pose. "Mr. Hercule Poirot, I presume," he said with an easy smile. "And you, monsieur, are Julian Vane?" "A pleasure," he replied. "And this must be your associate." "Captain Arthur Hastings," I supplied with a nod. "A pleasure," Julian repeated, though his smile wavered ever so slightly. Poirot returned the smile, his more enigmatic by far, and took a seat by the fire. "Let us speak, monsieur, about your aunt and her music box." Julian Vane was a man who wore charm as a uniform. His posture was relaxed, his voice cultured, and his suit, an ivory tweed with a faint blue thread, suggested tailored precision. Yet there was something just a touch too polished about him. As if, I thought, one well-placed question might cause the whole composition to unravel. "My aunt was a formidable woman," he began, pouring us each a glass of sherry. "A star in her day, and determined to live out her final years with dignity." "Of course," said Poirot, cradling the glass but not sipping. "And how were her final months, monsieur?" "You visited her often?" Julian's brow furrowed slightly. "As often as I could. I was in London most of the time. Business affairs. One must earn one's keep these days after all." "Indeed," said Poirot smoothly. "And business is good." Julian's smile tightened. "Reasonable. Nothing extravagant, mind you. The estate requires upkeep. And your aunt's passing, was it sudden?" "Very. She retired early one evening and never awoke. The doctor said it was her heart." Poirot tapped a finger lightly against the glass. "A common thief. The heart. It robs so silently. And yet, sometimes it is made to stumble by unnatural means, n'est-ce pas?" Julian blinked, the smile freezing in place for a breath too long. "Are you suggesting—" "Non, non," said Poirot, waving a hand. I suggest nothing. I ask, and you answer. That is our little game, yes. I almost choked on my sherry at the casual boldness. Julian, to his credit, recovered swiftly. I can assure you, he said, voice calm, there was nothing suspicious about my aunt's death. She was 73. Age alone is sufficient culprit. Poirot nodded slowly. And the will? Julian paused. It named me as the primary heir, yes. Aunt Cecile had no children. I am the last of the line. And what of Miss Eleanor Vane? Julian's expression cooled. A cousin, distant. Her father was estranged from the family. I had no reason to believe she would be a beneficiary. I noticed Poirot's gaze shift, just for a moment, to a mahogany writing desk in the corner. There, a letter opener lay askew. Nothing remarkable. Yet Poirot seemed to see something I did not. Monsieur Vane, he said, rising, you are gracious, and you are lying. Julian's head snapped up. Lying, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot bowed. Gently, subtly, but to Hercule Poirot, even the silences shout. I knew then. The investigation had truly begun. The woman who entered the room might easily have been overlooked. Slight in frame, plain in dress, and utterly quiet in her movements. But there was a composed dignity about Miss Florence Gray that instantly suggested she was not one to be underestimated. She greeted us with a brief nod, her eyes flicking to Julian before settling on Poirot with polite curiosity. She sat with hands folded neatly in her lap, the picture of domestic service and discretion. Miss Gray, Poirot began, offering a gentle smile, we understand that you were very close to Madame Vane in her final years. I was her companion, she said simply. Her voice was low and steady, without emotion. I remained with her until the very end. And you were here, in the house, on the night she passed? Yes. I prepared her tea, as always. She said she was tired. I helped her to bed. She died in her sleep. Without complaint? Without illness? Florence hesitated, just for a breath, but Poirot, of course, noticed. She had been more fatigued of late, but Madame disliked doctors. Fatigued in what way? I asked, hoping to be helpful. She slept often, ate little. Sometimes she seemed confused. Poirot leaned forward. And did she speak of fear? Florence's lips parted, then pressed together. She had her worries. About whom? Another hesitation. She had always found Mr. Blythe, her former manager, a little overbearing, but I believe he meant no harm. And Mr. Julian? He is her nephew. That is all I will say. Poirot nodded slowly. Loyalty, mademoiselle, is admirable, but when it clouds the eyes, it becomes dangerous. She glanced at him then sharply. I loved Madame Vane, she said quietly, and I would never speak ill of her blood. Poirot tilted his head. Interesting. And yet, you say nothing of Miss Eleanor Vane. Her blood also, no? Florence's expression changed, just slightly. Miss Eleanor was rarely here. She had little place in Madame's affections. I see, said Poirot. And what of the music box? Her eyes flickered. She listened to it nightly. I wound it for her before bed. And you noticed nothing unusual? No. Poirot's gaze lingered on her face. You are certain, mademoiselle? She looked away. Quite certain. But as she left the room, I saw Poirot watching her closely, his fingertips pressed together beneath his chin. An admirable actress, Hastings, he murmured. But I do not believe her final performance is yet complete. Dr. Carlyle was the sort of country physician one might find in any English village, a man of tweed, bristles, and confidence. He arrived with a leather bag that he did not open, and a moustache that he did not trust anyone else's to rival. Good afternoon, gentlemen, he said brusquely. I understand you have questions about Madame Vane's passing. Just a few, said Poirot mildly, motioning him to sit. The doctor obliged. It was heart failure, plain and simple. She was 73 and had lived a rather indulgent life. She did not have a known history of cardiac illness. No, Carlyle admitted, but at that age such things often go undiagnosed. Perhaps, said Poirot. And yet, Mademoiselle Eleanor Vane has voiced concern over a mark, blood, she says, found within her aunt's music box. Carlyle frowned. Blood. A small smear beneath the velvet lining. The doctor considered. Post-mortem bleeding isn't unheard of, especially if there was pressure on the chest during resuscitation. Poirot gave a faint smile. But no resuscitation was attempted, no? Carlyle stiffened. Number She was already gone when I arrived. Then we must search for another explanation, n'est-ce pas? I think you're looking for complications where there are none. That, Poirot said, rising, is often where the truth is found. He offered no farewell, only a small nod. As the doctor made his way out, Poirot turned to me and whispered, a man most anxious to seem unconcerned. And yet, his mind, it races. You don't trust his diagnosis. Poirot's eyes gleamed. I trust nothing, Hastings, until it sings in harmony. And so far, the notes are clashing. Harold Blythe arrived with a sense of urgency and importance, though I couldn't help but notice it seemed rather practiced. He was tall and lean, with a brisk manner and a sharp, unsmiling face. There was something of the theatre manager about him still, despite his new role as steward of the Vane estate. I do hope I can be of assistance, he said, removing his gloves with careful precision. Madame Vane's passing was a tremendous loss. A most extraordinary woman. Poirot studied him silently for a moment, then gestured toward the seat nearest the fire. You managed her affairs during her retirement, oui? Yes, Blythe confirmed. All bookings, publications, memoir rights, and now I'm overseeing the transition of the estate. And were you present at the time of her death? No, I was in Bath for a publishing meeting. Madame had asked me to begin negotiating her memoirs. She was finally ready to put her story to print. Poirot's brow lifted. How curious. And yet, she had recently dismissed her solicitor and spoken of destroying old records. Blythe stiffened ever so slightly. I wouldn't know about that. She was a private woman. You do not strike me as the sentimental type, Monsieur Blythe. I was devoted to her legacy, Monsieur Poirot. That is all. Poirot smiled faintly. And the music box? Did you see it often? Every night, Blythe said without hesitation. She kept it on her bedside table. Sentimental value. Of course, Poirot murmured, though one wonders if it held other values as well. There was a moment's pause. Blythe's fingers tapped once on the armrest, then stopped. You think it important? I think, said Poirot, that Madame Vane was a woman who loved symbolism, a performer to the end. She left us a final act. The question, Monsieur Blythe, is whether you knew the script or merely the stage. The man offered a stiff smile. You've a taste for riddles, I see. Poirot returned it with a glitter in his eye. And you, perhaps, for misdirection. The library at Vane House was both exquisite and underused, judging by the fine layer of dust on the uppermost shelves. Poirot and I had been granted full access to the late Madame's personal files and correspondence, an offer Julian made with a touch too much ease, if you ask me. It was among a bundle of folded music sheets that Poirot found the letter. Ah, he said, extracting a single envelope with the care of a man handling a time bomb. Written in haste, torn at the fold, ink pressed heavily, a woman under emotional strain. He unfolded it and read in silence. Well? I prompted. Poirot passed it to me. The letter was sharp, bitter, and unsigned. Addressed to you who would dare threaten me, it referenced betrayal, blackmail, and a promise that my secrets shall be revealed on my terms. The final line read, "You forget, I have ways of making my voice heard long after my final curtain." "Do you think it was intended for Julian?" I asked. "Possibly," Poirot said. "But I suspect not. He is too cautious, too calculating. This was written to a man who overstepped." "Blythe?" "Perhaps, perhaps not. But notice! She says her voice will carry beyond the grave." I glanced toward the music box. "You don't mean—" "Just so," Poirot said. "Come, Hastings." Back in Madame Van's bedroom, Poirot took the music box once more into his hands and examined the underside. With a small tool from his pocket, he always carried one, he gently lifted the inner velvet lining. There, faint and almost missed, was the edge of a hidden compartment. "Empty," I said. "But recently disturbed," Poirot murmured. "There was something here. A letter. A note. Who would have known to take it?" Poirot smiled. "That, mon ami, is what we are about to discover." Later that evening, as the house quieted and the wind sighed across the moors, Poirot requested a meeting with the housekeeper, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Breck. "You were the one who helped Madame Vane with her correspondence, were you not?" he asked. "Oh, yes, sir. She never trusted typewriters. Said the keys made everything sound too final." "And did she write often?" "Every day, but especially the last week." Poirot nodded. "And was there ever mention of her will?" Mrs. Breck hesitated. "Well, she had her solicitor visit from London. But he left looking cross, and Madame burned a few things in the study fire that night." "She intended to change the will then?" "She told me," the housekeeper said softly, "that blood should not inherit simply because it is blood. She said Miss Eleanor had a kinder soul than all the rest put together." "And did you see any new will?" Mrs. Breck shook her head. "She asked me to bring her sealing wax and stationery 2 nights before she died, but nothing ever came of it. The solicitor never received anything." "Then it was never signed," I said. Poirot nodded gravely. "Which means legally, Monsieur Julian remains heir." "But morally?" I asked. "Morally," Poirot said, rising, the wrong ink dried. And with that cryptic phrase, we descended once more into the shadows of Vane House, where truth waited, just beyond reach. It is one of Poirot's lesser advertised qualities, his remarkable gift for disarming even the most reluctant of suspects without ever raising his voice. Unlike the police inspectors who leaned on threats or surprise, Poirot preferred the drawing room to the interrogation room, and tea over tension. He invited confidences as one might invite old friends to supper, warmly, without pressure, and never without purpose. We had agreed that each suspect would be spoken to separately, in one of the smaller sitting rooms near the back of the house, a place overlooked by no one, and yet isolated enough to loosen a tongue or two. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot said, as we waited for the first guest. "The trick is not merely to ask questions, it is to notice what is not said." "You mean omissions?" "Non. I mean silences, conscious, constructed silences. There is a difference, mon ami." The first to be summoned was Mr. Julian Vane. He entered with his usual air of detached courtesy, but I noticed the faintest tension in his jaw. "I trust I'm not under suspicion?" he asked as he sat. "But of course not," Poirot replied smoothly. "We are simply collecting the pieces of a puzzle." Julian's answers were crisp, rehearsed. Yes, he had argued with his aunt about money. No, he did not know of any change to her will. He reiterated his initial alibi, that he had been in London, and Poirot nodded graciously at each lie. Next came Dr. Carlyle, who bristled at being called again, but concealed it behind professional disdain. "I've nothing further to add," he said with a clipped tone. "As I told you, natural causes." "But tell me, Doctor," Poirot said mildly, "was Madame Vane's mind as sound as her heart allegedly was?" The doctor hesitated. "She was a touch forgetful, but no more than most at her age." "Merci," said Poirot. "You have told me much without meaning to." Harold Blythe followed. His tone was deferential, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught the flinch when the music box was mentioned again. Florence came last. She sat primly, hands folded. "How did Madame Vane sleep in her final days?" Poirot asked gently. Florence's lips tightened. "Fitfully. She spoke often of dreams, strange dreams." "And did she take anything to sleep?" "Only chamomile tea," she replied too quickly. When Florence left, Poirot looked at me gravely. "They have all given us a picture, Hastings, but none of them is the same painting. We are looking, I think, at a forgery." The next morning was grey and slow to lift, the fog clinging to the hedgerows like an old gossip unwilling to let the past lie still. Florence Gray arrived just before breakfast, uninvited but clearly purposeful. She looked tired, as though sleep had been a stranger to her through the night. "I must speak to Monsieur Poirot," she told me in the hallway, her voice lower than usual. Privately, I brought her to the drawing room, where Poirot, already immaculate and sipping chocolate, welcomed her with a single nod. "Mademoiselle Gray," he said softly, "you have remembered something." She stood, then sat, then stood again. "I didn't want to come, but I can't keep quiet any longer." Poirot set his cup aside. Florence's fingers worked at the hem of her sleeve. "It was the 3rd week of September. Madame had been growing more erratic, not in speech but in behaviour. She would forget where she placed things, letters, her spectacles, her sheet music. But what frightened her was the idea that she was being drugged." Poirot's eyes flickered. "And did she say by whom?" "Number only that she no longer trusted her tea." "Yet you continued to serve it?" "She insisted," Florence said quickly. "She said she would rather die than seem paranoid. She told me, 'If it happens, Florence, it happens. But someone will know. Someone must know.' And she left no note." "Not that I found, but I think she wanted to. She would take her writing set into her room and close the door. But the next morning, nothing. Only silence." Poirot rose and walked to the window, arms folded behind his back. "Tell me, mademoiselle, did Madame Vane have any enemies?" Florence gave a bitter smile. "She had admirers, some of whom turned sour. Julian wanted money, Blythe wanted control, and Dr. Carlyle. Well, he never liked being contradicted." "And you, mademoiselle?" Poirot turned gently. "What did you want?" Florence looked up at him. "Only to serve her. She was the first person in my life who saw me as more than furniture." Poirot's voice dropped. "You loved her?" A pause. Then, "Yes." "And did she love you?" "She never said so, but she knew." Poirot returned to his chair. "Then, Mademoiselle Gray, you are not the murderer, but you are still hiding something." Her face crumpled. "There was something in the music box. I saw her place it there once, a letter, folded with red wax. But the next day, it was gone. And you told no one? Who would have believed me?" Poirot sighed. "Indeed, but now at least I do." That afternoon, Poirot asked Julian Vane to join us again, this time in the sunroom. The choice of setting was, as always with Poirot, deliberate. Bright light pouring in through the large windows had a way of making people twitch. Julian entered with that same confident gait, but there was the faintest tension in his step, as if his composure were being held together with pins and thread. "Back for more, Monsieur Poirot?" he said, settling into the armchair. "Oui, monsieur," Poirot replied lightly. It is my nature to be thorough, and it is your nature, I suspect, to be selective with your truths. Julian smiled faintly. I'm not sure I follow. No? Poirot crossed his legs. Let us revisit your whereabouts on the night of Madame Vane's death. You said you were in London. A firm alibi, yes? I was, Julian replied, but this time the words came slower. At my club. Poirot raised an eyebrow. The gentlemen's club that, upon inquiry, was closed that evening due to renovations. Julian stiffened. I meant the hotel attached to it. Ah, but the hotel records, they show no Julian Vane signed in. There was a pause, brief, but damning. Julian cleared his throat. Perhaps I stayed under another name. Privacy, you understand. Of course, said Poirot. And perhaps you also travelled under another name? Because the railway porter at the station in Sussex remembers helping you with a valise on the evening in question. Julian paled. This is ridiculous. Is it? Poirot leaned forward. You were in Sussex. You returned to this house under cover of night, and you confronted Madame Vane. I wanted to talk, Julian snapped, to make her see reason about the will. She was planning to give everything to Eleanor, based on sentiment, not sense. You argued. She was unwell, emotional. But I left before midnight. Alive? Julian's lips tightened. She was alive when I left. Poirot regarded him a moment, then stood. Merci, monsieur. You have told me what I needed to know. As Julian departed, I turned to Poirot. You believe him? Non, Poirot replied. But he believes himself clever. That is useful. It leads to arrogance, and arrogance, he gestured to the empty doorway, always leaves a trail. That evening, over a late supper of trout and boiled potatoes, Poirot received word that Dr. Carlyle had returned for an unscheduled visit, ostensibly to check on the estate's staff. Poirot wasted no time in requesting a brief word. We met him in the hallway outside the study. The doctor, perhaps thinking the conversation would be routine, looked irritated. Really, Monsieur Poirot, he began. I have already told you all there is to tell. Forgive me, doctor, said Poirot with a gracious nod, but there is one thing that troubles me. A small inconsistency, perhaps, but such things matter deeply to me. Carlyle crossed his arms. Go on. You said Madame Vane's heart simply failed her, yet I have learned she complained of dizziness, disorientation, and hallucinations in her final days. You made no note of this in your report. I wasn't informed of such complaints. Florence Gray was with her nightly. She says otherwise. Carlyle hesitated. Then she should have said something. She says she did. She says you dismissed it. The doctor flushed. She's not qualified to make diagnoses. No, Poirot agreed. But you are. And you chose to declare natural causes without requesting a post-mortem. Why? Carlyle's jaw set. Because it would have been unnecessary and distressing to the family. A family, Poirot said mildly. That includes an heir who lied about his whereabouts and a manager who stood to gain from the silence. Carlyle didn't reply. Poirot took a step closer. Tell me, doctor, was it incompetence or complicity? Carlyle's eyes narrowed. You tread a dangerous line, Monsieur Poirot. Non, doctor, Poirot said with a faint smile. It is not the line that is dangerous. It is the truth waiting on the other side. The doctor left without a word. Poirot turned to me and said softly, He hides something. Not murder, perhaps, but guilt of another kind. And guilt, Hastings, it makes men predictable. It was well after tea when Poirot, with that peculiar gleam in his eye that signalled the scent of a clue, requested a quiet word with one of the housemaids, young Alice, barely out of her teens and quick to blush under scrutiny. We found her polishing silver in the butler's pantry, her head bowed so low over the tray that I wondered whether she feared it might bite. Mademoiselle Alice, Poirot said kindly, you are not in trouble. We merely seek the truth, which is sometimes more easily found in corners than in parlours. She looked up at him with wide eyes. I didn't mean to say anything before. Honestly, I didn't think it mattered. Ah, Poirot smiled, but it is often the things we think unimportant that turn out to be most illuminating. Alice fiddled nervously with her apron. Well, it was just something I saw, the night before Madame died. Go on, I encouraged. I was coming back from the linen cupboard, and I passed by Madame's room. The door wasn't shut all the way, and I saw Miss Florence inside. She was kneeling by the bedside, doing something with the music box. Poirot's brow lifted. She said she was just winding it, Alice added quickly, but she looked frightened. I asked if all was well, and she told me to go to bed. And what time was this exactly? About 11:30. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Merci, mademoiselle. That is most helpful. As we left the pantry, I turned to Poirot. You think Florence might have tampered with the box? Removed something? She may have, he said. Or she may have found something and feared it. But why lie? Poirot glanced back over his shoulder. Because, Hastings, a lie is often the child of love, or guilt, and both, I think, reside in this house. That evening, Poirot summoned me to Madame Vane's bedroom once more. By now, the scent of lavender had faded from the curtains, leaving only the musty traces of a room left untouched too long. Observe, Hastings, Poirot said, holding the music box as though it were a sacred relic. Do you recall what Miss Eleanor said? That her aunt had hidden a message, perhaps in here. I do, I said, watching as he gently pried open the lining again with his pocket blade. He lifted the velvet back carefully, exposing the wood beneath. At first glance, it seemed empty. Nothing, I said. Ah, Poirot replied. But look more closely, mon ami. I leaned in. Just beside the hinge, in the shallow groove of the wood grain, was a faint smear, dark brown, aged and curiously matte. Ink, I whispered. Poirot gave a satisfied nod. Mais oui, old-fashioned iron-gall ink. Rare now, but once common. And notice the slight feathering. It bled into the grain. This was no spill. It came from a pen. You think Madame Van wrote something and hid it here? I am certain of it. A letter, perhaps. A final message. It may have been sealed, perhaps in wax, as Florence described. But now it is gone. Taken, I said. But by whom? That, Poirot said, is the question that sings the loudest. He replaced the lining with care and closed the lid. Why remove the letter and leave the box? If the killer found it, why not destroy both? Because, Poirot said, his voice lowering to a near whisper, he did not know it was missing until now, which means, Hastings, someone else read it first. I stared at him. You mean Florence? Or someone else entirely, he replied. But the ink, it tells us a message was written. That alone is enough to expose the lie. By the following morning, the house was tight with tension. The fog had returned with grim resolve, curling like smoke against the windows, sealing us in with our questions. I sat in the library, trying to piece it all together. Florence lied about the music box. Julian lied about his whereabouts. Carlyle is hiding something. And Blythe, well, he's as slippery as a greased eel, I muttered. Poirot stood by the fireplace, hands behind his back, staring into the unlit grate. You see only fragments, mon ami, he said gently. But the picture is nearly complete. You've solved it, haven't you? Not entirely. One thread remains, a thread so fine, even I hesitate to pull it before the time is right. Then what do we do? Poirot turned to me, his expression serene. We wait. One cannot conduct a symphony without letting the final note play. Another musical metaphor? He smiled. But of course, this mystery began with a melody, and it will end with one. The encore, Hastings, is not a repetition. It is the revelation. I stared at him, baffled as ever. He patted my shoulder. Courage, mon ami. The curtain has not yet fallen. But when it does, we shall give them an ending they will not forget. There is something undeniably theatrical about a drawing-room confrontation. Perhaps it's the symmetry of it, the polished furniture, the high-backed chairs arranged like a jury box, the fire-casting shadows on anxious faces. Poirot always preferred it to the police station. He claimed it was a stage most perfect for the final act. It was just after 8 when all the suspects were assembled in Madame Van's grand drawing room. The atmosphere was tense, as if the very walls knew something wicked had taken place within them. Outside, the rain tapped against the leaded windows with an impatient rhythm, and the fire crackled. Not warm, but alive. Florence Gray sat nearest the hearth, her face pale but composed. Julian Vane stood by the drinks cabinet, arms folded, a hint of defiance in his posture. Harold Blythe hovered near the piano, his fingers twitching as though longing to play something to break the silence. Dr. Carlyle arrived last, stiff-backed and red-faced, muttering about wasted time. Poirot entered last, of course, immaculate as always. His shoes gleamed, his tie was pristine, and his little moustaches curved upward like quotation marks framing a secret. "Mes amis," he said, "you may wonder why I have asked you all here tonight." No one spoke. Tonight, we are in this room not to grieve, but to listen to a story of deception, of ambition, and of death. Julian scoffed. "You make it sound like theatre." Poirot's eyes sparkled. But it is, monsieur. Life, she is most theatrical. And murder. Murder is always a drama with 3 acts. Tonight I shall deliver the final one. He moved to stand before the fireplace, clasping his hands. You see, I have studied you all. I have observed the contradictions, the silences, the tremors of guilt. Madame Vane did not die peacefully. She was silenced. Gasps fluttered around the room. Poirot raised a hand. Let us not rush ahead. Before the truth, we must peel back the lies, layer by layer. His gaze swept over the room. "And I shall begin," he said softly, "with a lie told by the gentleman who claimed he was in London, but instead crept through these very halls, cloaked by the night." All eyes turned to Julian. Julian straightened under the weight of attention, his jaw tightening as though preparing for a courtroom duel. But this was not a court of law. It was Poirot's domain, and truth was his gavel. "I never denied I had reason to visit my aunt," Julian began defensively. "But that does not make me a killer." Poirot nodded gently. "Non, monsieur, but denying where you were makes you a liar. And when one lies about the small things, one may also lie about the grand." Julian opened his mouth, but Poirot raised a finger. "You said you were in London, your club, your hotel, all conveniently unverifiable. But you were seen, monsieur. The porter at the Sussex station remembers you. And more importantly, the housemaid recalls your voice, raised, heated, through the door." Florence's head snapped toward him. "You came back," she whispered. Julian's face darkened. "I had to. She told me she was changing the will." "And you could not allow that," Poirot said coolly. "Tell us, monsieur, what passed between you?" Julian looked around, his confidence bleeding out like air from a punctured tire. "She was being irrational," he said finally, wanting to leave it all to Eleanor. She barely knew the girl. I reminded her of what the family had done for her, of my father, of the sacrifices. Poirot tilted his head. "You pleaded." "Yes, and then I left." "What time, monsieur?" Julian hesitated. "Before midnight." Poirot's voice dropped. You are certain she was alive when you left? Julian's lips parted, but no words came. Yes. She was upset. But she was breathing. Poirot nodded. Very well. And what of the music box? Julian blinked. What? Did you notice it that night? The box on the table beside her bed? Julian hesitated again. Yes, he said slowly. She opened it, played it while I spoke, said it calmed her. And did you see her place something inside? No, I don't remember. But you looked, didn't you? After she died. You searched for the new will, and when you found the music box again, it was empty. Julian's colour drained. I only wanted to know if she had gone through with it, he whispered. I never meant to. Poirot raised a hand. You did not kill her, monsieur, but your actions left her vulnerable. Your visit, your pressure, it gave the real murderer the moment they needed. He turned slowly, eyes moving toward Harold Blythe. And so the curtain lifted on the next act. Poirot's next words fell into the silence like pebbles into still water. And now, Mademoiselle Florence Gray. Florence, who until that moment had sat like a shadow beside the fire, straightened with slow dignity. You have been loyal, yes, Poirot said, his voice gentle. Devoted. But your heart, mademoiselle, it was not merely that of a servant. No, it was that of a woman in love. Florence's eyes widened. Julian made a slight noise in his throat. Ridiculous, he muttered. She... Ah! Poirot raised a hand. Let her speak. Florence's face was pale, but her eyes met Poirot's squarely. Yes, she said quietly. I loved her. The confession hung in the room like a final chord in a requiem. No one interrupted. She was kind to me when no one else was, Florence continued. She saw me. Not as a maid, not as decoration, but as a person. Poirot nodded. And you hated the idea of another stealing that affection. Florence looked away. She began receiving letters, romantic ones. I never saw the name, but I knew they made her wistful, like she was young again. I didn't want to lose her. You believed the lover was a threat. She trusted too easily. Poirot's tone darkened slightly. So you watched her, even crept into her room at night. Florence's voice caught. Yes, but not to harm her. I only wanted to know what she was planning. I feared she was writing something foolish. Poirot's eyes were kind now. You are not the killer, mademoiselle, but your jealousy made you hide what you saw. You knew she wrote a letter and placed it in the music box. Florence nodded. It was gone the next day. Poirot bowed his head slightly. Love can be cruel, mademoiselle, especially when it blinds the eyes to truth. Poirot turned next to Dr. Carlyle, whose complexion had grown increasingly ruddy as the drawing-room revelations continued. Doctor, Poirot said, clasping his hands, you are a man of medicine, and yet your report was lacking. Carlyle stiffened. I reported what I observed. Did you? Poirot asked softly. Or did you report what was convenient? I was summoned late. The family didn't want an autopsy. I saw no external injuries. Her age, her recent fatigue, it fit. But the symptoms described, hallucinations, confusion, these are not signs of natural decline. They are signs of poisoning. Carlyle's jaw tightened. There was no reason to suspect. No? Poirot stepped forward. Then why omit mention of the ink on her fingertips? Why ignore the tea she never finished? Carlyle faltered. I didn't think it significant. You didn't want to think it, Poirot corrected, because to think it would mean admitting your error, and perhaps the fear that your signature had concealed a crime. The doctor sat stiffly. I made a judgment call. Ah, doctor, Poirot said sadly. You did more than that. You gave the murderer time. Time to erase the message, to steal the truth from the music box. Florence gasped. Julian glanced at the doctor sharply. You told me everything was settled. Carlyle looked away. Poirot turned back to the room. Let it be clear, I do not accuse Dr. Carlyle of murder, but I do accuse him of cowardice. A silence followed. The doctor, crimson now, said nothing. Poirot returned to his place near the hearth. We have heard the lies, he said quietly. Now, only one remains, the greatest lie of all. He turned slowly toward Harold Blythe, whose hands at last had stopped twitching. Poirot stood once again, the music box in his hands, as though it were some sacred artifact, its delicate inlay shimmering faintly in the firelight. This box, mes amis, he said, his voice rich with emphasis, has sung many songs, but none as important as the one it did not play. I leaned forward, struck by the weight of his tone. When Mademoiselle Eleanor Vane first arrived at my apartment, she told us of a stain, blood, found beneath the velvet lining, a detail that could easily be dismissed, but not by Hercule Poirot. Non, no. For what do we know of Madame Vane? She was a performer, a mistress of drama. When her voice failed her, she turned to her props. Poirot placed the box on the table before him. She was frightened. She suspected she was being poisoned. She feared her time was short. And so, she left behind her voice, in ink, in desperation. She pricked her finger to seal the letter with blood, not merely for drama, but so that someone, anyone, might believe it had been written in haste in truth. Gasps rippled through the room. Florence pressed a hand to her mouth. Poirot continued. I examined the interior of this box, and though the note was gone, the smudge of antique ink remained. Faint, but unmistakable. And more importantly, it told me that the message existed. Madame Vane did leave behind a warning. He turned to Julian. You searched for the will. You opened the box, but you found nothing. Why? Because someone else had already taken it. Poirot now turned slowly toward Harold Blythe. The one person who had both access and motive. The person who feared the contents of that letter more than anyone. Because it named him. Blythe stood stiffly, jaw clenched. You cannot prove any of this, he said coldly. Ah, monsieur, Poirot said, lifting a finger. That is where you are wrong. He retrieved a small envelope from his pocket. This was found in your study drawer, crumpled, torn, but not burned. A draft written in Madame Vane's hand, accusing you of theft, of embezzlement, of betrayal. She had discovered what you were doing with her estate. And when she refused your silence, you began to poison her, slowly, carefully. Blythe turned pale. Poirot's voice dropped. You tried to destroy her voice, but in doing so, you left behind your own. Harold Blythe's mouth opened, but no sound came. His fingers flexed slightly at his sides, as though he were calculating whether to fight or flee. You were desperate, Poirot continued, his voice now sharper, more commanding. Your management of Madame Vane's estate was riddled with inconsistencies. Funds were siphoned off under fictitious contracts, investment schemes with no returns. But she was not a fool. She confronted you. Blythe's throat worked. She had no proof. But you feared she might, Poirot said, pacing slowly in front of the fireplace. You tried to persuade her, perhaps even threaten her, but she resisted. And so, you took another path. Poirot pointed toward the tea service by the sideboard. You offered comfort, familiar routines, a cup of tea every evening, prepared by you on the nights Florence was away. And in that tea, you slipped something, untraceable in small doses, fatal, over time. Dr. Carlyle shifted uncomfortably. If what you say is true, we would find no residue. It would mimic heart failure. Precisely, Poirot said. You, Doctor, gave him the perfect cover. Unwittingly. He returned to Blythe. But you made one mistake. You forgot Madame Vane's flair for drama. You believed you could destroy her last words, her note hidden in this box, but the bloodstain remained. The ink bled into the wood, and Florence, though fearful, had already seen it. Lies, Blythe said. All of it. Poirot stepped forward. You removed the note and tore it up, but you did not destroy the draft, the one she had abandoned. That is what I found. He raised the envelope again. Handwriting analysis will confirm it. And motive, clear. You were to be dismissed, charged perhaps. You had everything to lose. Florence whispered, she trusted you. Blythe looked at her, then at Poirot, and said nothing. Your silence, Poirot said quietly, is your confession. For a long moment no one moved. Then Blythe slowly sat down, his shoulders collapsing like a puppet with its strings cut. I didn't mean to kill her, he murmured, staring at the fire. She said she'd ruin me. Everything I'd built, gone. No, Poirot said. Only the lies you built. Blythe laughed bitterly. She always said the stage would outlive us all. I should have known she'd leave a performance behind. He looked up, eyes hollow. It wasn't supposed to happen that night. I only wanted her. Weakened, confused, enough to delay. But she confronted me again, called me a thief to my face, said she'd write it all down. And so, I said, unable to hide my revulsion, you ensured she'd never had the chance. He didn't reply. Florence sat with her head bowed, tears streaming silently. Julian turned away from the scene entirely. Poirot reached for his pocket watch, checked it, then gently nodded to Lawson, the butler, who had been watching from the door. Call the police, Poirot said, and tell them the murderer is ready for his final bow. As Lawson departed, Poirot turned to me. And so, mon ami, he said, we learn once again that truth, like music, lingers even after the curtain falls. There was a strange stillness about Vane House the following morning, a kind of hush that wasn't quite peace. It was the quiet of exposed truths, of shadows retreating after too long cast. Harold Blythe had been taken away just after dawn. The constables arrived with a quiet efficiency, and Poirot handed over the damning evidence with the solemnity of a priest delivering last rites. Blythe made no protest, no declaration of innocence. He simply lowered his eyes and walked into the arms of justice with the resignation of a man who had been waiting for it all along. Julian Vane remained, though he might as well have vanished. The once proud heir no longer filled rooms with his easy charm. He sat in the morning room, staring into a cup of untouched coffee, his carefully pressed shirt wrinkled, his cufflinks absent. Even his voice had lost its bravado. I only wanted to protect the family name, he said once to me, barely above a whisper. But it seems I forgot what that name stood for. Florence Gray had left without farewell. She departed with only a single valise and a quiet note of thanks left on Poirot's breakfast tray. There was no apology, only 3 words beneath her signature. She was loved. And Madame Vane? Her presence still lingered, not in the creaking of floorboards or the echo of music, but in the way the curtains now fluttered freely, in the open windows and the sunlight streaming through rooms long shut. As we stood in the great hall preparing to leave, I glanced back once more. It's strange, I said. The house feels lighter. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Mais oui, Hastings. That is the nature of truth. It does not always bring joy, but it lifts the weight of illusion. He adjusted his cuffs and turned toward the door. Come, mon ami. The shadows have played long enough. Now, let the light have its turn upon the stage. A week later, we found ourselves once again seated in a lawyer's office. Not Poirot's usual habitat, but one where his little grey cells nonetheless felt quite at home. Eleanor Vane sat beside us, pale but composed. There was no trace of triumph in her face, only quiet relief. The new solicitor, Mr. Whitcomb, a mild man with keen eyes, had just finished reading aloud Madame Vane's unsigned will. Though incomplete, it bore the unmistakable evidence of the old lady's intent. She meant to leave the majority of her estate to Miss Eleanor, Poirot said, and she told several individuals of her plan. Furthermore, the previous version of the will is invalidated by testimony of coercion. Thank you, Monsieur Julian. Julian, who sat across from us with the weary air of a man unravelling, merely nodded. He had agreed not to contest the will. Whether from shame or exhaustion, it was difficult to say. Whitcomb cleared his throat. There is, of course, legal precedent for accepting an unsigned will when intent can be proven beyond doubt. And with the supporting evidence presented, he gestured to Poirot's carefully documented notes. I believe the case is compelling. Eleanor looked at Poirot. I don't know how to thank you. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, there is no need. Your aunt chose you for a reason. My task was only to ensure that choice was honoured. But the inheritance, she faltered. It feels like blood money. Poirot's eyes softened. Non, mademoiselle. It is not the money that bears the stain. It is what we do with it that matters now. Perhaps Vane House will not echo with secrets anymore, but with purpose. He glanced toward the window. And music. Eleanor smiled faintly, her eyes shining. Poirot turned to me, satisfied. It is done, Hastings, he said. The will, and the will of Madame Vane, both have found their voice. Later that evening, as the train rumbled gently through the countryside on our return to London, I couldn't help but reflect aloud. You know, Poirot, I still don't understand how you knew. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, no weapon. How did you leap from suspicion to certainty? Poirot, immaculately dressed even in travel, folded his hands over his waistcoat and smiled with maddening composure. Mon ami, you still think like the British policeman. You search for the footprint, the bloodstain, the dagger. But murder, true murder, is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. It whispers, not shouts. But you had so little to go on. Non, I had everything I needed. The lies. Ah, yes, the lies. They did not match. Each person's version of events contradicted the others in subtle ways. That is where the truth hides, not in the facts, but in the inconsistencies. He leaned forward. And more than that, I watched their behaviour. Julian's vanity, Florence's jealousy, Carlyle's evasions. But Blythe, he had control. Too much control. He was never surprised, never flustered, until the music box reappeared. So that was the trigger. Just so. He thought the past had been silenced. But Madame Vane had written her encore. He tapped his temple lightly. It is always the psychology, Hastings. The mind. It betrays far more than the body. I stared out the window, humbled. You really are remarkable. He patted my arm. Nature gave me a little grey matter, yes, but I also know how to listen. To the lies, to the silences, and to music. Back in London, Poirot placed the music box on the mantelpiece of his flat with surprising tenderness. It looked almost humble there, beside the Art Deco clock and the vase of fresh orchids. He wound it once, gently, and the tune drifted through the room, soft, melancholic, fragile. I suppose we'll never know exactly what Madame Vane wrote, I said. Poirot tilted his head. Perhaps not the words, mon ami, but we know the meaning. He let the final notes fade into the silence. She knew she would not be believed. That is why she used music. It was her voice when the world would have ignored her whisper. He turned to me, his expression unexpectedly warm. There is something terribly brave in that, n'est-ce pas? To leave behind a song instead of a scream. I nodded slowly. And you heard it. We, he said softly, because I listened with more than ears. The music box clicked shut, and in that small sound it was as if Madame Vane herself had taken her final bow. It was days later, while Poirot napped in his armchair with a silk handkerchief over his eyes, that curiosity got the better of me. I took the music box down once more, turned it over carefully, and examined the hidden compartment beneath the velvet lining. There, nearly invisible except in the right light, were faint traces, outlines of letters once pressed in ink, just the barest remnants, but unmistakable. A message had been there. I glanced at Poirot, still feigning sleep, though I suspected one eye might be open beneath the handkerchief. You found it, I said quietly. You read it. No response. You knew exactly what it said, and you never told anyone. Still nothing. Only the faintest curve of his moustache twitching upward. I smiled. You sly old fox. Replacing the lining, I returned the box to the mantelpiece. Somehow, I didn't mind not knowing the words. They had served their purpose. Justice had been done, and the dead, those truly loved, had been heard. And as I poured the tea, I thought to myself, with Poirot, one must never assume the last note has played. There's always one more encore. As the rain returned to patter gently against the windows of Baker Street, Poirot stirred his tea with deliberate care. You see, Hastings, he said with a faint smile, murder may be committed in silence, in shadow, even with elegance. But the mind, the mind leaves fingerprints more damning than any in ink. I nodded, still pondering the faint letter outlines I'd found in the music box's secret compartment. And yet, I mused, you never revealed what it said. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Some truths, mon ami, serve best in silence, others in justice. I chuckled. Well, next time someone tries to kill me with chamomile tea and an aria, I'll be sure to check for bloodstains in the music box. Poirot raised an eyebrow. It is not the tea you must distrust, Hastings. It is always the hand that serves it. Now it's your turn, detectives. What do you think was the most telling clue that exposed Harold Blythe as the true killer? Was it the blood in the music box, the lies, or something far more subtle? Drop your theories in the comments. We love reading your deductions. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more of Agatha Christie's classic detective stories to life, one case at a time. And remember, a new Poirot mystery is just around the corner. Stay sharp, mes amis. The truth always reveals itself in the end.